The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Yaron Brook Show. I hope you're ready for the weekend. It's Friday night. I'm certainly ready for the weekend, although it's going to be a work weekend. But I like my work, so that's a good thing, not a bad thing. We have a lot to talk about today. Today's going to be one of those news kind of updates, just news briefings. A lot going on, a lot of smaller stories. You know, the big stories are still going on in the background, but we've talked about them so often. I figured we'd just go through a bunch of stuff. I want to talk about the Columbus statute that has gone down in Chicago. We're talking about drug prices. President Trump, signed 4 executive orders today relating to drug prices. I want to talk about stimulus 3.0. I think it's 3. It's hard to keep track with Congress printing money like crazy. It's hard to keep track of which stimulus this is exactly, but I think it's number 3. Interesting, I saw an article that compares presidents and stock market performance. So I thought that would be good to kind of, as an overview. A lot of people often use stock market performance to evaluate and to measure the success of a president. So I thought it would be interesting to look at whether stock markets indeed do reflect the success of a presidency. The article also has some good economic data about what happened during the presidency that we can look at, which I think will be interesting. And finally, if we have time for this, I didn't put it in the title, but if we have time for this, Senator Hawley, maybe my favorite senator now, I'm being sarcastic, introduced a new bill to fine American companies relying on Chinese slave labor. Slave labor, other places I guess is okay, but Chinese slave labor, not good. So we'll talk about what that means, how we define slave labor, all of that, if we have a chance. So, so a full schedule, although, you know, I don't know that there's any one of these is going to be is going to take a long time, but hopefully it'll all add up to something interesting. And of course, you're all invited to submit super chat questions on YouTube, and the more money associated with the question, the more likely it is to be answered quickly. I try to answer all the questions, but the ones with the higher dollar amount will get priority. So please use the super chat question to engage. Jason has already asked a question, but yeah, these we'll get to after we cover kind of the heart of the program. Of course, if you ask a question relevant to the thing that I'm covering at that particular moment, I'm more likely to answer it quickly. So Jason's question is going to wait because it's not related to anything because I haven't talked about anything yet. All right, let's talk about Columbus. I think everybody saw. If you didn't see, it's a depressing video. I shared it on Twitter. It was making the rounds I guess it was 3-4 days ago, of crowds, rioters, literally attacking police, throwing stuff at them, bottles. I don't know if there were rocks. It was hard to tell. Firecrackers. Just throwing stuff at police, and police who had, in Chicago, police who had surrounded a statue of Christopher Columbus and tried to protect it from the mob who was intent on tearing it down. And it was just this horrible, you know, picture of a complete breakdown of law and order in this country, a complete breakdown of any respect for the police, any respect for the rule of law, and just, you know, rioters doing as they wished. Ultimately, the police had to retreat because they were being, they were getting injured, I think, from all this stuff. And they were helpless. Didn't have riot gear on. They didn't have the kind of weapons that would allow them to protect themselves. They weren't going to shoot their guns because we know how that ends. And they should have had weapons that would allow them, without inflicting, death on people, to protect themselves and to force the rioters back. Bottles of urine, somebody says. I mean, just a horrific scene. And by the way, scenes that I've seen in Portland and in other places as well. But in Chicago, it was just, because it was filmed from a variety of different angles, there were a lot of people there with cameras. Just horrific. And ultimately, the cops retreated. The demonstrators, or rioters more accurately, took over the space of the sculpture. The sculpture was wrapped. It wasn't even just a statue anymore, because it was wrapped, I guess, to protect it. They tied a rope around it, tried to pull it down, but they were pretty incompetent and unable, and they couldn't pull the sculpture down. They couldn't tear it down. And then the police reorganized, and I guess they got the right kind of gear, and maybe they got reinforcements with some riot police, and they pushed the rioters away. And it was so ultimately they backed off, partially because they had failed to pull down the sculpture, the statue itself, and partially because they had the police actually got aggressive with them and pushed them back. Now, so that's kind of the context. Now, this is Christopher Columbus we're talking about. We're not talking about treasonous generals defending slavery. We're not talking about commanders or politicians or even intellectuals who were defenders of slavery. We're talking about Christopher Columbus, who sailed into the unknown, sailed not knowing where he would land up, thinking he was going to India. We're talking about Christopher Columbus, who discovered a new continent, who ultimately led to the settlement of a new continent. We're talking about a man who achieved great things, who had a vision to imagine what it would be like to sail into the horizon and discover new things. We're talking about a man of his time, the era of exploration, or really one of the people who led and launched the era of exploration, a great era in human history, that at the end of the day brought Western civilization to the Americas and to the rest of the world. And that is a massive achievement. Now, was he cruel? Yes. Did he view non-Christians, particular pagans, as subhuman? Yeah. I don't think he was as racist as much as he viewed anybody who was a pagan as subhuman. To me, what made Christopher Columbus vicious is much more his religion than his ethnicity or his ethnic preferences. So Christopher Columbus was vicious, treated the inhabitants of the new land he discovered disgracefully. He treated anybody, I think, who was not one of the Christian, or I don't know what his attitude towards Jews was, but at least Judeo-Christian, with disdain and disgust, and enslaved and treated them brutally. And that's all true. That does not wipe out the history-altering, history-changing act that he did. We don't celebrate Columbus as a bigot, as a religious nut, as a religious fanatic. We don't celebrate him to the extent that he was a racist as a racist. We celebrate him as an explorer, as somebody who was brave, courageous, and pushed civilization forward. Now, Matthew says he's not sure Columbus was cruel based on some recent articles. It might be. It might be that I'm wrong. The stuff I've seen suggests that he was cruel, but maybe not. His cruelty And there's various interpretations of it, but from what I've seen, his cruelty was primarily motivated by his insistence on kind of converting people to Christianity and treating people who were not converted really, really badly. But I'm not an historian, so I'm not claiming. But that's the worst you can say about him. And his virtues are significant. And not to understand him, I mean, this is a time where tribes, Native American tribes, tribes in Africa, tribes all over the world, primitive tribes, barbaric tribes, skinned people alive, took scalps, prided themselves in murder, rape. I mean, this is not, people on the left primarily have this notion of, and it's interesting because I talked about Rousseau in another show, but they have this this notion from Rousseau, how about that? That before civilization, before progress, before maybe even Greece in the West, and before there were towns and cities, when we were hunter-gatherers, it was the Garden of Eden. Life was just beautiful. We were happy. We ate healthy food. We lived long lives. We had great sex. We never killed anybody. We wandered the earth naked and happy and one with nature and other human beings. We were probably all vegans, because God forbid we probably didn't kill anybody. So it's probably not hunter-gatherers, it's probably just gatherers. Like, we probably didn't hunt because that would be kind of brutal. We were these noble savages. It really is a Garden of Eden fable of primitive man. And think about even the biblical story of Garden of Eden. I always find it interesting. Like Jordan Peterson has this whole story of Bible stories. You know, all these lectures. Thousands of people went to see it live. Millions of people have watched them online. And a lot of it is just he's not reading the same stories I am. Because think about the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve don't need to do anything. They care for the garden, but it's not exactly clear what caring for the garden is. And the food is just there. Everything is just there. And they're happy and content. But note that they're not human. So as you know, they have no sex. They have no kids. They have no knowledge. They have no self-awareness. In other words, in the Garden of Eden, in the story, in Genesis, Adam and Eve are pre-human. They're on the cusp of being human. You can even view them evolutionary as on the cusp. They have no reason. They have no free will. They have no ability to think, contemplate, and self-contemplation's out. They don't live. They don't produce. They don't do anything. And that, for some reason, you know, Judeo-Christianity has instilled that as some kind of ideal, as some kind of perfection, as some kind of something to strive to. It's like people think of retirement. Oh, I'll just sit around in my, lounge chair or on the patio or whatever and just be, and just, my Social Security money will come in and I'll just live off of that and it'll be so relaxing and so beautiful. And usually they die pretty quickly because it's boring as hell. How is Genesis not Christianity? Genesis is the foundational book of Christianity. Christianity is the New Testament, but the New Testament doesn't replace the Old Testament. The New Testament builds on the Old Testament. No serious Christian rejects the Old Testament. In particular, doesn't reject Genesis. Maybe they reject later on all the stories about the tribe of Israel, but they do not reject Genesis. Otherwise, they're not Christians. They're a new cult that they made up. Jesus certainly does not reject Genesis. And they know Christian rejects the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve. It's foundational to Christianity. And indeed, Jordan Peterson speaks about it as such. But what is it that gets them kicked out of the Garden of Eden? It's eating from the tree of knowledge. It's becoming human, becoming self-aware, right? They cover their genitals, which is a sign, I guess, of self-awareness when you're obsessed with sex. But they eat from the tree of knowledge. They gain the capacity, if you will, to reason, to think, to be. And that's what turns them into a human being. And then at that point, they identify each other as sexual. That's why they cover their genitals. They have kids ultimately. They live as human beings. They become human beings. The tree of knowledge makes them human beings. That's civilization. And that, God tells them, because they ate from the tree of knowledge, they will lead a harsh life. That is, what brings harshness to life, what makes life, according to somebody like Jordan Peterson, miserable, difficult, painful, essentially suffering. Essentially suffering is eating from the fruit of knowledge, becoming civilized, becoming human. And yet for Rousseau, it is that pre-civilization, pre-being human that he strives towards. And therefore, we have this notion of a noble savage. And a noble savage, everything is forgivable to a noble savage. But Christopher Columbus does stuff that is wrong, and probably did a lot of things that are wrong, particularly given our understanding of ethics and morality today, given our understanding of universal values, given our understanding of that we're all human. I mean, right? But it's the standards by which we evaluate him are absurd. So they want to take it down. A sculpture, a statue of Christopher Columbus. They're ahistoric. They're anti-Western civilization. They're anti-everything that civilization represents. And, Deborah asked the question, do you think the Columbus advancement of civilization via the discovery of America and the subsequent settlement and the founding of America are the real targets of the protests, animus towards him? Absolutely yes. Yes. What they hate is civilization. What they hate is the West. And what they hate is its superiority, its success, its pro-man nature. That's what they hate about it. They are despisers of mankind. They are egalitarians who want to bring us down to the level of savages. Down to the level of noble, so-called noble savages, a pre-human. They want Rousseau. And I talked about this when I talked about doing away with the police. Rousseau believes that it is these institutions of civilization, like the police, like a legal system, that create the criminals. It is the institutions of civilization, learning and science and reason more than anything, that create, by trying to, put in a straitjacket the noble savage, is what creates criminality, is what creates disillusionment with society. It is what creates all the problems that we have. And what we're seeing in these rioters is exactly is exactly that. It's exactly that attitude. That attitude towards history, towards man, towards civilization. They're lashing out against America. They're lashing out against freedom. They're lashing out against capitalism. They're lashing out against progress. They're lashing out against Western civilization. And at the end of the day, they're lashing out against reason. And Christopher Columbus is just the latest victim of that, and they've been building towards, tearing down his statue for decades now. I remember Columbus Day has been under attack for 20 years or 30 years. And then next, and already to some extent, are the Founding Fathers. And beyond that, it's Renaissance figures, it's Enlightenment figures, it's anybody who is promoting Western civilization. And that would be true no matter the color of their skin. I mean, just wait. I mean, everybody turned against people like Frederick Douglass, and they will turn if they haven't turned explicitly, but they've turned implicitly against Martin Luther King. And I think even Malcolm X would be horrified by the ideas circulating among the so-called people who support the black community. So-called support them, because I don't think they do. So, I think when Christopher Columbus statues are coming down, it's an ominous sign. I'm all for getting rid of sculptures of treasonous, people who committed treason, people who fought for slavery, people who intellectually, vigorously supported slavery. I'm all for getting rid of those statues. Again, using the rule of law, using the appropriate mechanism to get rid of them. But Columbus, Founding Fathers, absurd, ridiculous, insane, end of Western civilization kind of stuff. All right, let's quickly, is anything here related to, yes, if the God of the Bible was a man, wouldn't he deserve to be despised? I mean, certainly a lot of the women in the feminist movement, if you claim that God was a female, is a female. But the very attribution of sex to God seems to be weird, in my view. I mean, God has to be asexual. But clearly in the Old Testament, he's a man. And he behaves like a man, an angry man, a jealous man. He really behaves in the Old Testament like an authoritarian thug. Authoritarian thug. So if women want to claim him, fine. If the feminists want to claim him as theirs, they can have him. I'm not going to defend God's manhood. He can do it himself if he cares that much about it. The only Christopher we acknowledge is Wallace. Chris Wallace. He's the guy who interviewed Trump. It was a good interview. I think Chris Wallace did a good job. Finally, somebody called Trump on some of the BS that he says. All right, let us see. Talking about Trump. All right, this is a good transition. Talking about Trump. Today, President Trump signed four executive orders dealing with drug prices. None of which, by the way, liberated the market for drug prices. None of which reduced government involvement in drug prices. None of which involved freeing up the market for drug prices. There we go. See, TDS. Because I mentioned drugs. I mentioned Trump. It's TDS. TDS time, guys. The anti-concept of TDS and all the people who love to flaunt it, whatever. Right? Go read the executive orders. Don't have to believe me. Basically, Trump is advocating for the same drug pricing measures that are in Joe Biden's platform. You can check that out. You can read Joe Biden's platform about drug prices, and you can compare what he wants to do when he gets elected with what Trump has just done. Now, executive orders like this, they don't get implemented immediately. It takes months, and they probably won't get implemented by the election. So either Trump will implement them in his second term, or they'll be implemented by Biden when he is president. But in any case, they have exactly the same policy on drug prices. And it happened today. So just go see it, right? Or is that going to offend your Trump lobotomy syndrome or whatever it's called? Number one of the four, there were four of these, right? First one was that drug companies will be forced. No, but this is capitalism, right? We force drug companies to do stuff because we have a free market president. So drug companies will be forced to sell prescription drugs in the United States at the same price that they have negotiated with other countries. Now, other countries have socialized health systems, so they negotiate as a country because the socialist system negotiates to buy the drug. And other countries, the drug company has no choice. They use the coercive power of government to tell the drug company, you either sell it at this price or we won't buy it from you. Or even some countries go as far as to say, you sell it for us at this price or we will fund a generic. Even if you've got it under patent, we will violate your patent, sue us. Go sue Canada or sue the European Union. In other words, other countries use brute force, literally brute force, to negotiate drug prices with drug companies. Guess what? They get the drug cheap. But the drug company still has to make money. And it still has to fund R&D. So in the one country where we still don't believe in using force, I emphasize force, but don't pay attention to me because I've just got Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, so now it's not Trump's fault for sucking up to the electorate. Oh, okay, I get it. So you believe now politicians should just suck up to the electorate. They shouldn't be, just listen to yourselves. They shouldn't be leaders. They shouldn't try to guide the country in the direction on which they were supposedly elected on, of free markets, let's say, of pro-capitalist. But they should just, the electorate wants the government to control and force pricing on drug companies. They should just do it. And you will continue to worship presidents like that. So that's beyond criticism. So to criticize Trump for doing something clearly wrong, anti-free market, anti-capitalism, anti-American, because the people want it, that's Trump's derangement syndrome. And you think it's not an anti-concept that is just used to smear people like me who are objective critics of President Trump. I mean, you guys are just, thank you, Philosopher K. You're just providing the evidence every time you open your mouth on how nutty you guys are. He should really drop the philosopher because based on his commentary, this philosophy is very remote from anything he holds. I'm not measuring Trump against an objectivist. I'm measuring Trump the way I would measure any president, based on the role of government. I'm measuring Trump on the same standard I measured Obama, on the same standard I measured Clinton and Bush, and I will measure whoever comes after Trump. I am measuring Trump on the basis of, should government be doing this? Is this the role of government? By any standard. But I didn't measure Obama by the standard of objectivism, and I measured him by the standard of the role of government, the principles on which this country was founded. And if you say, yeah, okay, he violates our rights when it comes to drugs, he violates our rights when it comes to, the stimulus package, He violates our rights when it comes to a million other things. But he's the best we have, fine. But, you can vote for whoever you want. You can support whoever you want. But my job as a cultural commentator is to comment on what's going on in the world. And when a president does something that is anti-individual rights, anti-American, anti-capitalism, I comment on it. And it strikes me as bizarre that those of you who claim to be pro-free markets think I shouldn't. Wow, that's so weird. That's just weird. So we're going to be forced to pay the same price as Europe and Canada because we're the same as Europe and Canada, according to Trump and Biden, according to a majority. Now, there are people, by the way, in the Republican Party who oppose this, and this is why it hasn't become legislation. There are better people within the Republican Party who understand these kind of things and oppose this. But they can't stop an executive order, so the executive order is in place. What that will do is deny drug companies from any ability to make money. It will deny drug companies the ability to do any R&D. It will kill the production and discovery of any new drugs and innovation because we are going to kill the last country in the world that actually makes it possible for drug companies to make any money. This is, of course, all done through Medicare. So what it'll do is it'll raise your insurance costs. Every one of you individuals. Insurance costs will go up. Why? Because Medicare will be paying Canada prices. But you as an individual will pay whatever the insurance company can negotiate with the drug company, which will be higher. And it'll be much higher because not only now will you have to be subsidizing Europe and Canada, but you'll have to be subsidizing even more Medicare patients. Medicaid and Medicare patients, government patients. You'll be subsidizing government health care. And all this does is it moves one step closer and one step closer to socialized medicine. So philosopher K says, but Trump has appointed conservative Supreme Court judges, and he's better than Clinton. He didn't write that one. He supported good conservative. Who cares? Am I talking about Supreme Court now? Did I tell you to hate Trump? Did I tell you not to vote for Trump? I'm just telling you what Trump did with drug prices today. And you guys lose it. Lose it. And if that is not indicative that you have a problem, then I don't know what is. I don't know what is. So, it sucks. By the way, I find it curious that when I criticized Obama on Obamacare, nobody said, but he's not an objectivist. Of course he should do Obamacare. Well, what's the difference between Obamacare and the government now regulating the pricing of drugs? When Ayn Rand criticized Nixon for price controls, people didn't say, but Nixon isn't an objectivist. I mean, you guys are babies. All right, not you guys, just philosopher K. And anybody else who thought what he was thinking during that's executive order number 1. Executive order number 2 prevents drug companies from giving rebates to insurance companies. So insurance companies get these rebates that they can either pass on to you or not pass on to you. It's a complicated, convoluted system created by government regulation. And Trump is going to do away with these rebates, which the drug companies like because they don't like this, but the insurance companies don't like. But the whole thing is a product of bizarre Byzantine regulations that we should get rid of that would free up the insurance companies and drug companies and healthcare industry generally to provide us with actually market services. But no, we don't want to move towards solutions that are capitalist because the voters don't want that, and God forbid we lead the voters. Instead, we're going to adopt everything in Biden's plank in order to appease the voters before an election. Okay. I mean, again, you can check to see if both of these features are not in Biden's plan. They are. What were the other two? The other two, one was to allow states to go out there as a state and buy drugs from a foreign country. So they can buy, the state, let's say of New York, can go and buy drugs from Canada at those cheaper prices that Canada has negotiated. And then the state, I guess, can use them in their Medicaid programs and whatever. Again, driving up your cost if you have private insurance. So it's statism on steroids. I mean, it's bad enough the way we treat drug companies today. It's bad enough that healthcare in this country has been socialized to the extent that it has. Now we have Republicans, not objectivists, Republicans, moving us towards greater and greater and greater statism. I've often said that we will get socialized medicine under a Republican administration. And then the fourth executive order was about health centers are going to be forced, again, that word force, to pass on negotiated discounts on insulin and EpiPens to patients. Again, we need government involvement for this. You wouldn't think that if we eliminated regulations, maybe these things would happen anyway because of markets. Maybe markets provide cheap, efficient solutions to products. But no, we need the force of government to force solutions on the markets. Just fine. Not an objectivist president. Just don't tell me he's a pro-markets president, pro-capitalism president, pro-anything president that's good. Okay, that was drug prices. Stimulus. All right, Republicans and Democrats are negotiating Stimulus 3.0, the next phase of a stimulus package with COVID and shutdowns. The economy is still in trouble. There's a real, restaurants are closing. A lot of small businesses are hurting even more. People are hurting because they're not working. Unemployment is through the roof. There's the risk of more people getting laid off. I mean, the government incompetence in dealing with COVID. Again, sorry, but the government has been incompetent from Trump on down, and I've documented that in great detail. The consequence has really, really bad economics. And the solution is the solution of all statists. The solution is the government should borrow money and hand it out to people. Hand it out to businesses that they favor. Hand it out to individuals based on all kinds of criteria that they decide make sense. But borrow money from us in the future, from our kids and our grandkids, borrow money against future economic growth, because of this borrowing we will have lower economic growth in the future, and hand it out. And the fact is that nobody, right? Nobody talks about, nobody opposes us. Nobody's talking about the deficit. Nobody's talking about massive government spending. Literally nobody cares. Nobody cares. Everybody's a Keynesian, including Republicans, including Trump. Everybody is enamored with government solutions. The government will solve our economic problems. The government will pay you not to work. The government will pay you not to open your restaurant. The government will pay you to keep going. And Republicans have an opening bid of $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Remember when they lambasted Obama for having a $900 billion stimulus package? The opening bid on the third stimulus package is $1 trillion. This would take total stimulus to $3.7 trillion. $3.7 trillion. 4 times what Obama did. 4x. And even you don't care. Nobody cares about this stuff. And the Democrats' opening bid is $3 trillion. That would take the total stimulus to $5.7 trillion. 6 times what Obama proposed. I think they'll probably compromise on somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion. And the total spending on stimulus will be over $4 trillion. I know you don't care because it's mind-numbing. It's mind-numbing even to think about it. And it doesn't mean anything. It's $4 trillion. All right. Which has to be borrowed. Most of the borrowing is going to be from the Fed, which means the Fed will then print the money, which means that money will slush into the economy, new money. They won't cut spending anywhere else. They'll indeed increase spending anywhere else. There's no talk about cutting spending in anything. And we are facing the largest deficit since World War II, the largest government debt ever in terms of percentage, or maybe since World War II, as a percentage of GDP. And again, nobody cares. Where's Rush Limbaugh? Mark Levin? Where's Mark Levin? Where's Ben Shapiro? Maybe Ben Shapiro's arguing against us, but nobody's making a big deal out of it. We're all Keynesians now. We're all believers in central planning now. We're all believers that the government can solve all problems now. We're all modern monetary theory people now. And we love Trump. It doesn't matter. We still love Trump. $4 trillion. We love Trump. It's something where this country has gotten to over the last few years. You know, when Rush Limbaugh says, "Yeah, we never believed that the deficit was a problem. We just did it because it was Democrats spending the money." What hope is there? I mean, I gave the hope last time, but what hope is there? Print money, baby. Print, print, print. Absolutely. All right. Before we go to presidents in the stock market, which is kind of interesting, I want to remind you to press the thumbs up, like the show. You know, don't forget to like before you leave, because a lot more viewing the show than actually pressing that like button, but it is important. It helps with algorithms. It helps us do better. So thank you for those of you liking the show. Don't forget to share the show when you have a chance to your friends and your supporters. And for those of you who are not yet supporters of the show, I hope you will become. I hope you support the work that I do, the effort, the expenses, the value that I think these shows represent for you. You can support the show at $2 a month, at $500 a month. We have lots of different levels in between those, so please do so. YaronBrookShow.com/support. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it on Subscribestar. You can do it on Locals. But please support us so we can grow and we can get better and invest more in what we do, so we can get the word out to a bigger and bigger and bigger audience. Our audience is definitely growing. It could be growing faster with your support. So I saw this article in Forbes today that compares U.S. presidents and the stock market performance during their presidency. And it basically reinforces something I've told you in the past. That is that the most successful government, that the best government for the economy, put everything aside, but for the economy as represented by the stock market at least, is a Democratic president and Republican House and Senate. A Democratic president, Republican House and Senate. When you think, since World War II, so we're not going to go pre-World War II, but since World War II, under which president did the stock market perform the best? And I'll remind you that for many people, I remember the first 3 years of Trump, it was like, look how great Trump is, the stock market's up, right? And that was their standard. So I'm curious what you think the best performing stock market under a president is since Truman. So you've got Bush, Nixon, Kennedy, Ford, Carter, not in order, Trump, Johnson, Bush, Truman, Reagan, Eisenhower, Obama, and Clinton. Right. Well, best performing stock market under any president since World War II was Clinton. 1993 to 2001, the S&P 500 went up 210%. 210%. Now, there are all kinds of reasons why that's cheating, but it's not my measure for a good president. It's just, it's people have used this, and I'm just reporting the data. This is just facts. The second president who had the second best performing stock market, is Obama. Obama, with 182% return. Third best, we're getting to Republicans. Finally, Republicans. Who's the third best stock market performance ever? I mean, since World War II. Eisenhower, 1953 to 61, 129% increase in the stock market. Notice, almost half, not half, but quite a bit lower than Bill Clinton's. Not that Clinton was a good president by any means. Ronald Reagan is number 4 with 117%. Harry Truman is number 5 with 87%. George H.W. Bush is number 6 with 51%. Lyndon Johnson, another Democrat, in addition to Truman, is at number 7 with 46%. Donald Trump is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th with 43%. Not great. Jimmy Carter, below Trump at 28. Gerald Ford at 26, had 74 to 77. JFK, surprisingly, 16%. Then Richard Nixon with negative 20, and George W. Bush, negative 40. And there's a relationship between George W. Bush being at negative 40 and Bill Clinton being at plus 210. George W. Bush inherited a stock market bubble produced under Bill Clinton, but survived a 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis. Obama, of course, did well because he started at the bottom with 2009. So he started when stocks were very low, and they went straight up from there, 182% over his 8 years. But it is interesting. It is interesting. And I often told people who said, "Oh, look what a great president Trump is because stock market's up." Don't know if that's the measure you want to use for the best president ever. Right? Not sure Trump will look good, and I'm not sure you want the president who actually did well in the presidency, in the stock market, to look good like Clinton and Obama. Neither one of them a favorite of mine, far from it, and yet produced amazing stock market returns. I wish I had invested when they took office and sold when they went out of office. Man, people are distorting my views on everything on the chat today. I've never claimed we should nuke Iran. I don't know where that comes from, but that's what the Trump lobotomization syndrome does to people. I've never claimed Trump should nuke Iran. I never claimed anybody should nuke Iran. I have other ideas about Iran. If you do a super chat, I'll let you know what they are, but I've never said that they should be nuked. All right, that's President of the Stock Market. One more short topic, and then I'll turn to your Super Chat questions. So if you have Super Chat questions, feel free to ask them now because we're almost at that point in the show. I just want to mention Senator Hawley's bill. I'm reading a story about it in the Federalist. I haven't read the bill itself. It's a bill that would fine American companies relying on Chinese slave labor. It's a bill that would require American companies to actually get certified by, I guess, somebody, the State Department maybe. CEOs would certify to the U.S. Department of Labor that their companies are not using slave labor in the supply chains. No definition I've seen of slave labor. What does slave labor Does it mean does it also include the children working in mines in Africa, getting rare metals out of the ground, which are used in every cell phone that you use? Right? Yeah. Right. Hard to tell, but what it does mean, and there's a section here that's interesting. Where is it? It's, yeah. In addition to companies that benefit from Chinese labor camps, it says, Hawley criticized businesses like Starbucks and Nespresso for the use of Brazilian workers that Hawley alleged are, quote, denied basic necessities like food and water. In other words, again, this is straight out of Biden's economic plan. This is the Tucker Carlson wing of the Republican Party that believes that capitalism is responsible for slave labor around the world, that believes that it's our responsibility, that it's the American government's responsibility to make sure that American companies, not American consumers' responsibility, but American government's responsibility to make sure that American companies are not using, I don't know, sweatshops, so-called slave labor, Brazilians who are not getting the appropriate amount of food and water. I don't know. But this is socialism or fascism. This is altruism. This is America taking care of everybody in the world. This is the new Republican Party. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. This is the nationalist conservatives' Republican Party. This is a Republican Party that believes in industrial policy, believes in trade policy, not in free trade, in trade policy, believes in bringing regulatory, environmental, and labor regulations to the rest of the world to create a so-called level playing field. All right. Let me just address these lies about me. So I called for, if necessary, the total destruction of Iranian infrastructure to give them the infrastructure their philosophy deserves. I don't see what's wrong with that. I've never argued that that Trump in particular is not done that, and that's a bad thing. I think all American presidents have failed in this regard, starting with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, starting with Jimmy Carter, in the 1980s when Iran took hostages. I challenge anybody to challenge me on the facts, challenge me on the evidence, challenge me on actually what happened. The idea that an American president would be called a war crimes, who cares? You're the president of the United States of America. That used to mean something. Harry Truman didn't shudder for the fact that somebody might call him a war criminal when he launched a heroic attack against Hiroshima and Nagasaki and dropped atomic bombs. Either you're an American first foreign policy person, and in that case you defend America, and if that defense requires the destruction of the Iranian regime, then you destroy the Iranian regime. You don't think about just war theory and what the Catholics are going to think of me. So again, my standard is not what people will like, what the electorate will believe in, what is nice, what the Europeans will like, what the left will admire. My standard is the truth. My standard is what's right. My standard is what is moral. My standard is what is just. What does justice require? And I acknowledge that nobody's going to do what I'm asking them to do. And I lambasted George W. Bush for not doing it. I lambasted Obama for not doing it. And I intend to continue lambasting Trump for not doing it. But I have Trump derangement syndrome. That's okay. When I was attacking Bush, I had Bush derangement syndrome. So nothing's changed in the world. All I'm arguing for is truth. I'm arguing for is justice. You might disagree with my foreign policy, then let's have a discussion about foreign policy. You might disagree with my tactics when it got to war. I have never seen anybody take my Just War Theory article and actually critique it. You want to critique it? Go for it. Somebody of substance wants to debate me on Just War Theory? Fantastic. I would love to debate just war theory. I actually did. I actually debated. The chairman of the chairman of the philosophy department at the Air Force Academy. I debated the chairman of the philosophy department at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The debate was at the University of Colorado Boulder about just war theory. I don't have any problem debating these things if it's somebody worthy of the debate, like the chairman of the philosophy department at the Air Force Academy. And, bring it on. But to say I shouldn't criticize Trump because, he'd be, war crimes or whatever, bullshit. I'll criticize anybody who does the wrong thing or doesn't do the right thing. That's my job. And I'll compliment them when they do the right thing. DDV Show writes, and I've heard this from so many vets who fought in Iraq and fought in Afghanistan, that just war theory is real, he writes. It affected me over there. Yaron knows what he's talking about on this subject. I know. I've talked to Marines. I've talked to soldiers who came back, and they have tears in their eyes because they know how many American kids died because of the rules of engagement, the just war theory, because of Petraeus and Mathis and these generals who don't know how to fight wars, who do it by tying the hands of their soldiers behind their backs. And I criticize American foreign policy, and I criticize American generals, and I criticize West Point, and I criticize Walzer, Michael Walzer, who is the leading philosopher of just war theory. And I criticize them, and I'll take them on in any kind of debate. And I'll criticize Trump when he says stuff that's wrong or does stuff that's wrong. And I find it bizarre. Bizarre. And I don't prefer Biden. My preference is, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, Biden is a disaster. Biden is horrible. He and the Democratic Party is insanity, particularly the left wing of the Democratic Party. What I prefer is to save the Republican Party. What I prefer is some hope for future generations. What I prefer is that maybe in 8, 12, 16 years we have decent candidates. What I prefer is to save the possibility that somebody like, and maybe I'm wrong about her, Nikki Haley, or maybe somebody like the governor of South Dakota, or maybe some, and I don't know, maybe they're terrible too, or maybe somebody like even Ben Sasse has a chance of being president one day, rather than Hawley and Tucker Carlson and Trump's son being presidents in a few years. What I prefer is that Trump be defeated by a large margin in this election, not because I'm pro-Biden, not because I like the Democratic Party, not because I think Biden will be a good president or a better president in any kind of sense of policy, but because because Trump and the Republican Party has to be penalized. It has to suffer the consequences of voting for Trump, of having Trump as president. And I've said this before, just the failure of COVID should justify getting him out of office. But it's not. The whole movement of the Republican Party towards what they call, not me, they call themselves, national conservatism. The rise of various forms of alt-right need to be penalized. Now, 4 years later, we should crush the left. Absolutely. Right now. If you want America to have a future, right now, if you want better candidates to have a future of winning in the elections in the future, right now, if you want the Republican Party to survive even with a semblance, even with a hint of support for free markets and the founders of this country. Because Hawley and the national Republicans reject the founders. Reject the founders. They reject the Declaration of Independence. They reject the idea of individual rights. Just read Bradley Thompson on this, who's not a hater of Trump. Just read Bradley Thompson on what the right has become. If you want the better elements of the right to survive, if you don't want them to be kicked out of the Republican Party, decimated and destroyed by Donald Trump and his cronies, then you have to shake up the Republican Party. And I don't know any way to shake up the Republican Party if Trump wins. If Trump wins, his ideology, which is a thoroughly corrupt ideology, will dominate the Republican Party. Will dominate the Republican Party, and the Republican Party will move dramatically towards statism and authoritarianism, and to the creation of what Leonard Peacock predicted in DIM much faster than any other route. That's my point. That's my point. Now, and I said this, if Trump loses by a small margin, you'll still have a battle within the Republican Party, but the Trump-like people, like Tucker Carlson and Hawley, will argue that the message was right, but the messenger wasn't, so we need somebody more charismatic with the same message, the nationalism, the statism. And whether that's Tucker Carlson or somebody else, I don't know. Only if he loses in a landslide will the Republican Party have a battle within where the better elements, the elements that are truly pro-markets, or not truly because none of them are, more pro-markets, more pro-freedom, and have at least a respect for the founders. Only then that part of the Republican Party has a chance to survive. Already, many of the better conservative intellectuals have been so marginalized, have been so trivialized by the Trumpkins within the Republican Party that they have been sidelined completely. Imagine if he wins again, Republican Party is finished with any semblance of founding ideas. That's my point. Iran is going to get nukes. Trump is not going to stop Iran from getting nukes. The only thing that will stop Iran from getting nukes is Israel. I don't know. This is another item in the news. I don't know if you guys have been following this. But over the last couple of months, there have been various explosions, fires, bombings, various accidents all over Israel. All over Iran, including in the facility where they have the centrifuges. And in the facility where they do the centrifuges and where they are developing nuclear weapons right now, under Trump's nose, Israel blew up their facility and has blown up power lines and power centers and all kinds of things like that have happened. All kinds of accidents, all clustered around the last few months. And basically Israel has concluded, and I think absolutely justifiably, that Trump will not stop the Iranians, that Trump is not doing enough, and that Israel has to do it itself, and they are. Now they're doing it covertly instead of launching massive attacks. We'll see if Iran responds. Israel has been chipping away at the Iranians in Syria and Iraq, again, which the Trump administration basically laid down a red carpet for the Iranians to come into Iraq and into Syria, following Obama and Bush doing the same thing. And Israel is the only party over there that's doing something about it. This is why the Saudis have become much more friendly towards Israel, because the Saudis are afraid of the Iranians. But the idea that Trump stands up to the Iranians because he killed one general is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. The Iranians have shot down drones of ours. They have acted aggressively in the Gulf. They have killed American troops in Iraq. They've stuck their finger in Trump's eye over and over again, and he killed one general. I mean, good that he killed that general. It was a good day. But that's it. That's better than Obama. All right, good. The standard now is better than Obama. That's the standard. How do you know Trump's working with the Israelis? How do any of you know that Trump is working with the Israelis? You don't know that. There's no evidence of that. Trump would like to negotiate another deal with the Iranians. Again, better than Biden. Okay. Again, I laid out my theory about the long game. I actually play 4D chess when it comes to politics. You don't know what if you don't have a long game, that's fine. You'll vote for Trump. You know, I won't, and that's okay. Bibi doesn't love Trump. Bibi sucks up to whoever he thinks will help him maintain power. Bibi is one of the most power-lusting, horrible, corrupt politicians ever. And he is willing to suck up to anybody. He would have sucked up to Obama if he thought it would get him anyway, in order to support his political career. And yeah, he sucked up to Trump. And, you know, Trump did some things that are pro-Israel, but the peace plan that he put out is certainly not pro-Israeli and not good for Israel. It's not the worst peace plan we've seen coming out of it, but and Bibi was supposed to annex parts of the West Bank, and he didn't. Why didn't he? So I mean, believe me, I know something about Israeli politics, know something about what's going on in the Middle East, know something about what's going on in Israel, and it's not what you think. And Bibi's not tough. Bibi's not strong. Bibi's a weakling. He's a political manipulator. All right, let's see. I'm trying to catch up on shows. Last week you mentioned a $20 priority level for Super Chat. It was just that those who pay more should get priority. That's life. My inner altruist wilted. Good. To the extent that I can destroy your inner altruist, I feel satisfied that I'm doing my job. So good that the inner altruist has been destroyed. Thank you again, Yaron. We really have to focus to get you on Joe Rogan. I know. Peter Schiff was just on. I saw that and hit 1.6 million views. It doesn't surprise me. Instagram and Twitter grew significantly. I've just sent Joe Rogan a recommendation email about you. Unfortunately, I don't think the recommendation emails work. I mean, it's fine to do them. I don't think they hurt at this point. But, you know, Joe Rogan is just going to have to decide he wants me on. And what goes into that decision matrix, I don't know. As I've told you before, lots of people have recommended me to him, including Dave Rubin. He follows me on Twitter. Joe Rogan does. So he actually follows me on Twitter, so he knows who I am, or at least somebody over there knows who I am. You know, Dave Rubin sent him an email, said, hey, Joe, you should have Yaron on. And he CC'd me on the email, and Joe Rogan never responded. So I just don't know what will trigger it. But at some point, someday, something will happen, and it'll trigger, and it will happen. All right, let's see. Should breaking irrational laws be encouraged? No. I mean, we live in a place where there are laws, and we should generally follow the law. If the law is clearly disrupting our lives, and you're willing to take the risk that you will then go to jail for breaking it, then break it. But I am not for breaking irrational laws because there are consequences to it. You sit in jail. It's not selfish to sit in jail. You should argue against irrational laws, lobby against irrational laws, form coalitions, demonstrate, but generally shouldn't unless your life depends on it or the consequences are pretty bleak. So what kind of irrational laws should you violate? Speeding laws, because they're irrelevant. You might get a fine. Usually you don't get caught. Immigration laws, your life depends on it. I'm fine with them breaking those. But, you know, when marijuana was illegal and you really liked marijuana in it, I'm not pro-drugs, but okay. You're not going to get caught. There are not going to be horrible consequences to it. What else? I'm sure there are other irrational laws that I think are okay to break, but generally, I say no, not unless, again, you're willing to pay the consequences for it, and you have to really think about what those consequences are and make sure it's worth it. For a lot of people who immigrate here illegally, it is rational for them to take that risk, and I can completely understand that, why it's irrational for them why it's rational for them to take that risk. Have I ever played poker? Yes. I'm a terrible poker player. Just so you know, terrible poker player. Because, and the reason is, I can give you my secret, is I'm an impatient poker player. And I get bored easily. Generally in life, I get bored easily. And so what happens is I never fold. Because, like, folding is boring. I'd rather, hold the hand almost every game. And I get wiped out very quickly. So, but I have fun. And I play poker to have fun, not to make money. Why did you have to jump out of a van during your road trip? It wasn't a van. It was actually a regular car. And I was 18. Yeah, I was 18. I was hitchhiking. I was in Florida, hitchhiking north of Jacksonville on Highway 95, hoping to get to Washington, D.C. And somebody had picked me up, and I had by that point learned not to separate myself from my backpack. So I had one of these big backpacks with sleeping bag and everything with me, and it was in the front seat with me, right there. Because I'd learned from previous hitchhiking that would be the case. And basically it became clear to me that this guy, had every intention to rape me. And had friends who, and that's what he started talking about and making clear that that was his intention in various ways. And I was not going to wait and see what was going to happen. So I basically, as he slowed down at some point on the highway, and this is literally on the highway, Highway 5, 95. He was on the right-hand lane, and it was late at night, and he slowed down for reasons I will not disclose, and I basically opened the door and rolled out. And I had the backpack with me, so I rolled out onto the backpack so that, supported my fall by hitting the side of the road. And he sped up and went flying out of there. And I walked then on the side of the road, convinced he was going to come back and get me, and landed up walking. I guess we were not far from the border with Georgia. So landed up walking to the rest area that was there between Florida and Georgia, and spending the night on a bench in the rest area. I had very little money. And spent money on the bench on the border between Florida and Georgia, and then swore that was the last time I would hitchhike on the trip. But I had to get out of there, right? Because there were no bus stops. It was 95. It was the Highway 95. So I basically went out and I said, okay, last ride. And I stuck my finger out, and this guy stopped, and he said, where do you need to go? I said, look, I just need to go. Just take me to the closest exit bus stop, something where I can get a bus, and I'm going to take a bus. And he said, well, I'm going to New York City. Do you want to ride? I said, wow, okay. I'm going to Washington, D.C., so just take me to Washington, D.C. And he said to me, as he said, on one condition. Right? Remember, I had slept 4 hours on a bench the night before. He said on one condition. I said, okay, what's the condition? He said, you can't fall asleep while we drive. So the whole purpose of me having you on is I left early in the morning in Miami. I have to be in New York, and I have to drive the whole time, and it's late at night. I'm going to be driving for many, many hours. You have to talk to me the whole time. You cannot fall asleep. I said, fine. So I get in the car, and of course, every few minutes I doze off, right? Because I haven't slept. And he elbows me. Every time I fall asleep, he elbows me to wake me up, and he says, talk to me. And we landed up talking the whole time. And he dropped me off in Washington, D.C. On the eve of Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish fasting holiday. Okay, this will be the end of the story. I'll just tell you this part because it's funny. he drops me off on the eve of Yom Kippur, and I was supposed to stay that night at some friends of my parents, Israelis, Jewish, and spend a few nights with them before I flew back to Israel. And I get out of, I'm starting to think, it's Yom Kippur. I'm going to get there. They're going to be fasting. Yom Kippur is when you fast. I won't be able to eat for like 24 hours. I better eat before I go visit them. So I go to like McDonald's or something, and I just stuff myself with food because I figured I'm going to be fasting even if I don't want to because I'm staying at these people's house, and this is going to be really bad. And so I stuff myself, and then I show up at their place, and and I must have stunk, right? I haven't showered in days, and I stunk. I've got a beard. I looked like a real hippie, I'm sure, and a hippie with my knife in my sock, thinking I would defend myself. And they say, "Oh, look, we prepared a whole meal for you." and there's a whole table laid out with food for me. They weren't fasting or anything, and of course I had to eat because that was the polite thing to do. Anyway, that was the very end of my long hitchhiking. I hitchhiked from Los Angeles to New Orleans, and then from New Orleans to Washington, D.C. And that was literally the last 2 rides of the hitchhiking story. And I don't know why you care about any of that. Maybe it's entertaining. And I've got a lot of hitchhiking stories earlier in the trip that are kind of fun. But I won't tell them unless you ask. All right. Hey, Yaron, we know that production creates wealth. But how does that manifest itself? The central banks measure added GDP when add to the money supply. Okay, how does it manifest itself that it creates wealth? Well, there wasn't a plastic bottle before. There is one now. This plastic bottle is worth more than the raw materials that went into it. It's worth more than the raw materials plus the labor that went into it. We know that because somebody is paid and the company made a profit. That profit represents wealth. And my gain from having this bottle represents wealth. This is worth whatever I paid for it. This is more valuable to me than having to go and drink from the faucet for whatever reason, right? So my quality of life, standard of living went up. So wealth is created on both sides of the transaction. On the side of they put together the raw materials and the labor in such a way as to create something I was willing to pay more than what it cost them to do it. That's wealth creation. If I paid for this less than what it cost them to produce, in other words, if they had taken a loss, that would actually be in wealth destruction. So that's wealth creation, and it's not measured really anyway. It's not in GDP. It's not anyway. Certainly, the value this bottle represents to me, to my life, is not measured anyway. Let's say in some places in the world, the only other water I have is filled with malaria, and I would be sick. The fact that I'm drinking water from a bottle and it's saving my life, we don't measure that. As economists, we don't know how to measure what economists call consumer surplus. The value consumer gets above and beyond what they paid for the good. And consumer surplus, if you had to monetize it, is many, many, many trillions of dollars in the world every year. So, and that's one side of the wealth, right? Do central banks measure added GDP when add to the money supply? No, but when the government spends it, it's measured in GDP. So, for example, the stimulus plan is measured in GDP. Right? That's part of the measures of GDP. Government spending, government consumption is measured in GDP. I'll give you the example of this. In 1940, I think it's 42 or 43. I think it's 40. The U.S. is in World War II, just ended World War II, and is ramping up massive production of raw materials, right? And the raw materials are paid for by government. But the war materials are not increasing wealth. They're there to blow stuff up and to destroy. They're there to eviscerate. But GDP goes up 12%. 12%. Not 2, not 3, not 4, 12. Standard of living is going down. Unemployment's huge because all the men overseas, and many of them are dying. But GDP goes up. Consumer surplus goes down. Wealth creation goes down. But GDP goes up because government spending goes up. And government spending is spending on war, which is not a wealth creator, but a wealth destroyer. All right, I'm an electrician, and our supplies are running out of standard materials that we need. Is this a sample of what it's like to live under socialism? Well, it's a sample of what it's like to live under socialism, yes. It's also a sample of what it's like to live under trade barriers, to live under what's called decoupling, under nationalism, under a situation where there isn't trade, robust trade, large quantities of trade. And it means that the supply chains are being disrupted for a variety of reasons. It could be, in this case, tariffs or just a disincentive to trade with America. Right. But yes, socialism, fascism, nationalism, trade barriers cause shortages, and ultimately prices to go up when you have these shortages. If you were CEO of a drug company, how would you respond to countries which compel drug prices under threat? Is there an alternative to complying? I don't know what the alternative would be. To go on strike, to not sell the drug in that country. But then they'd violate your property rights and go to India and hire a company to make a copy of your drug and sell it. So I don't know that the CEO has an alternative. I don't know what the CEO could do. Yep. Yeah, you see, I sympathize with Emiliano. I might want Trump to win, but I'm not lobotomized Trumpian. If your standard is better than Obama or Biden, that's pathetic. The guy is a terrible president. Yes, he's a terrible, you can admit he's a terrible president, say, for these reasons, I'm still going to vote for him. And I've never had any problems with people who say that. I think you're wrong, but I've never had any problems with people who say that. It's the people who defend him. Defend even his insanity. Defend even the worst of his actions, like meeting and just groveling over the brutal dictator of North Korea. That's the people I have a problem with. In beginning of the film Patton, G.C. Scott states that individuality is garbage. Why do you think he said that? He wants soldiers to be like drones. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Patton was a very mixed guy. He was a mystic. He definitely had a strange view of, an authoritarian view of soldiers. He didn't want soldiers to think for themselves that much, or at least he said that. Patton was a mixed character. He was a genius, a brilliant general, and I wish they had given the European command to him and not to Eisenhower. I think Eisenhower was a pretty mediocre general and much more of a politician than a military man. Certainly not a military man devoted to winning the war. He was never devoted to winning it quickly. Patton was. Patton could have ended the war probably 9 months earlier than it ended. And if you're interested in reading about Patton, I'd recommend Victor Davis Hanson. He's got a chapter on Patton, one of the 3 great generals that he covers in one of his books. I can't remember the name of the book. But Patton was a great general, but he certainly had really bad ideas. He believed in reincarnation. He believed he was a reincarnation of some great Greek general. Right? Would you consider a movie review of Dangerous Beauty? Philosophically, I think it is one of the, it's a very good movie. I can't remember it well enough But yes, if I see it again, I will definitely do a review of it. Okay, last Super Chat question, unless somebody rushes one in right now. Isn't the CCP, this is the Chinese Communist Party, abusing, quote, free trade to destroy capitalism? How can a true free trade market survive? Consider a debate discussion with Kyle Bass. Yeah, I'd be happy to debate Kyle. I think Kyle's wrong, completely wrong on this, and the consequences are pretty horrific. Everybody abuses, quote, free trade. I mean, does the United States? Don't we subsidize many of our industries? Certainly we subsidize our farmers. We subsidize, Europe subsidized its farmers. It subsidizes its aircraft manufacturer. We, the United States, subsidize Boeing. We subsidize lots of our companies. If you're interested in a pact in which everybody agrees to reduce subsidies to zero, I'm all for that. But the fact that China subsidizes more than we do, so what? It means it's subsidizing us. Why wouldn't we benefit from those cheap products? And it's not destroying capitalism. The people who have destroyed capitalism are Americans, Europeans, people who used to have some capitalism. China can't destroy, an outside element cannot destroy capitalism. It's just mathematically impossible, and in reality impossible. China actually made trade with China since 1980 to today is a massive net positive to the U.S. economy. Not a little net positive, a massive net positive. And a massive net positive to the U.S. Capitalism, to U.S. companies, to appropriate deployment of capital. So the fact that they so-called abuse it by, for example, subsidizing their companies, putting tariffs on our businesses, hurts them. It hurts some of our companies, but others benefit enormously. So it's just reshuffling the decks. It doesn't on net hurt our economy. The only proper trade policy is zero tariffs. That's it. So this is an example of why the pro-Trump people are unprincipled, complete pragmatist, and this is a guy who said he agreed with my foreign policy. He has no clue about my foreign policy because he writes that North Korea critique is a perfect example of TDS. Right. What exactly did Trump lose by trying to meet with him? Really? You don't understand what sanctioning evil means? You don't understand what negotiating with evil gives the evil side? You don't understand that the devastation to morale in North Korea? You don't understand the boost that it gave the dictator of North Korea? And what did it give America? Nothing. Nixon should have never met with Mao Zedong. And Ayn Rand criticized him for doing it. I would argue Reagan didn't need to meet with Gorbachev. And Gorbachev was much better than this guy in North Korea. We should have never negotiated with the Iranians. Chamberlain should have never met with Hitler. One of the most basic principles in objectivism, in Ayn Rand's philosophy, if you believe in that philosophy, maybe you don't, that's fine, is that the good has nothing to gain from evil, should never negotiate with evil, should never sanction evil. And to the extent that you do, they always win. Now that's a basic foundational principle of objectivism. And that is true in your day-to-day life. And that is true in politics. And that is certainly true in foreign policy. And every example of it in foreign policy has turned out to be right. And again, it can't be TDS. Because the fact is, if Obama had done it, I would have criticized Obama. If Bush had done it, I would have criticized Bush. Indeed, I criticized Bush. When Bush opened negotiations with North Korea, I criticized him. When Obama negotiated with Iran, I criticized him. When Obama negotiated with North Korea, I criticized him. None of them met with the bastards in North Korea. So I didn't criticize them quite as much as I criticized Trump. But how can it be TDS when I would have criticized any president who would have met with the guy in North Korea? How does that... I mean, again, this is why the TDS is just a way for them to hide their own irrationality. And it's a way for them to ignore facts, evidence, rational discussion, actual debate. And it's not like what I just said about North Korea is new. It's not like I haven't said it like 100 times, and if you've been following the show, you know about it. And it's not like I ever get from these people any benefit of a doubt in terms of why I say what I say about Trump, even though I've given mountains of evidence, and even though anybody who's followed my career knows that I was a huge critic of Bush and a massive critic of Obama. So I'm just continuing a long tradition. How is this TDS, which should be something unique to Trump, right? You can't have OTS and Bush TDS or whatever, and, that's ridiculous. I am a critic of all U.S. presidents who do irrational things, which means I am a critic of all U.S. presidents, period. If I'd been commenting on Nixon, I would have lambasted Nixon, Clinton, all of them. And I continue with Trump. Angel's Philosophy, thank you. That is an incredibly generous contribution. Thank you, I really appreciate that. The fact that you discovered the show recently is great. I hope you have read Ayn Rand, and if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to read Ayn Rand. That's where the real good stuff is. And, thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of you who support your show. I very, very much appreciate it. Before I go, please remember to like the show. If you're on YouTube, just press the like button. If you're on Facebook, you can press the like button there as well. Don't forget to share it. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And if you are a subscriber and you'd like to be notified when there is a live show, then please press the bell that's next to the subscribe button. And finally, if you would like to support the show, I've got a new level now that I've added to of support to Patreon. I couldn't do it on Subscribestar, but Patreon and YaronBrookShow.com/support, a new level, $500 a month, which gets you a half an hour with me one-on-one every month, and gets you generally, open access to me. But $500 a month, I would love to have a few people at $500 a month. We're trying to raise a significant amount of money here to do bigger and bigger things. I'm also launching, trying to launch a program here to see if we can get on some mainstream media, see if we can get on television, see if we can do some radio shows, and even do some podcasts, and throw in Joe Rogan in there. But so there's a bit of an effort to get me to do that. I'm working with the Ayn Rand Institute on that, but we're going to try to do more media and to try to get more exposure, broaden the exposure across many media platforms. So we want to grow this thing, and we want to make a real impact out there in the world, make a real impact on then people who have not read Ayn Rand yet, and get them to read Ayn Rand. And the bottom line is, this is a philosophy of reason and a philosophy of egoism. And reason is about facts. It's not about opinions. It's not about emotions. It's not about what you feel like, what you want. It's about facts. And reason is about long term, and it's about thinking. It's about planning. It's about having a strategy, about life, about politics, about everything you do. And that's what we want to talk about. Yes, I was on Ben Shapiro's show, and I talked about religion. Ben and I kind of were good, so hopefully Ben will have me on again. We'll see. That would be nice. I've even been on stage with Jordan Peterson, although we didn't get to actually really get an exchange or a disagreement. But my goal is, if you guys have any pull with Brett Weinstein or Eric Weinstein or any of the big podcasters, I'd love to get on their shows. That's the way we'll expand the audience, is by getting on other people's shows and expanding the audience that way. So that's going to be a big push in the next few months, next few years. My goal is to get these ideas out there. And all right, good. Thanks, everybody. Sargon is starting a news website. Well, we'll see. I'm not sure how far alt-right Sargon has gone or not gone. We'd have to check out Sargon. But I've been on Sargon's show before. I've had quite a few conversations with Sargon. You can find them all on again, YouTube. I judge everybody on objective standards. Everybody. So again, I can't have Trump derangement syndrome because I judge everybody by the same standards. The objective standards, the only standards I know. The standards of reality. The standards of objectivity. The standards of truth. I'm not here to be a Republican. I'm not here to judge them by the standards of Democrats or by the standards of Republicans or by the standards of whatever. I judge actions by the standards of objectivism. I judge platforms. I judge ideas, all by the standards of objectivism. I judge the changes in the Republican Party by the standards of objectivism. I judge the left by the standards of objectivism. It's not an issue of relative. It's an issue of relative to the standards of truth, the standards of reality, the standards of morality. And that's the way you should live, people. If you're going to live by, it's better than the shit over there, I'll eat this shit instead, then your life will suck. Will love you suck. No, the standards of objectivism are right here in this world. And the only way you'll ever get better, the only way we'll ever now end with this, the only way to move the political landscape to the good, towards goodness and righteousness and capitalism, is to challenge them from that perspective. It's to present the good. If you're just going to say, well, Trump's the best that we have, so let's all be supportive of Trump, and you never criticize him, and you never do, then nobody will ever be better than him. If we, the so-called champions of reality, champions of reason, champions of capitalism, won't advocate for frigging capitalism, then who will? If we, the champions of a true America First foreign policy, don't advocate for that policy and don't criticize everybody for not having it, who the hell will? If we don't stand for the Declaration of Independence, for individualism, for individual rights, for capitalism, for freedom, then who the frigging do you expect will? If you, in the name of objectivism, in the name of Ayn Rand, sell out to a ugly monster like Trump, there's the TDS for you, then what's the point? What's the point? What have you done? And if that's how you live your life, then I pity you, because I don't live my life like that. I live my life by the highest standards of objectivism. I seek out the best, the highest, the most noblest people, art, food, everything. I might not always find them, but I seek them out, and I do not compromise. If you want to mire your life in the muck, in the mud of conventional politics and never criticize because he's better than the shit on the other side, then it's on you. It's on you. And I pity you. Sorry. That's what Derek likes about the Yaron Brook show. I know. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Go find some great values. Go enjoy yourself. Forget about politics this weekend. Find something fun and exciting and interesting and stimulating to do. And do it. And live.